The Outer Wilds is a 2019 video game developed by Mobius Digital, and if you've heard any of your friends talk about it, you've probably heard about how incredible it is, how it is the greatest video game ever made, how it is the art of video games itself distilled into perfection. That's mine, quote, that's my, if I ever recommend it to any of my friends. And I can't tell you much about it because it's such a unique, fundamentally personal experience for the player to go through that I don't want to spoil anything for you. But rest assured, it is a spectacular journey. What I can say is finishing The Outer Wilds and its DLC, Echoes of the Eye, which I also recommend, was one of the most profound and emotional experiences of any piece of media I've ever consumed in my life. And to be fair, it might not actually be for some people. To give a little summary of what The Outer Wilds is like, it's a sci-fi space exploration adventure where you're trying to figure out a mystery of this handcrafted solar system, and it follows your character on their journey to discover the answer to this mystery. Gameplay comes through incremental exploration and figuring out puzzles and things, but what actually happens is there's a deeper experience of emotion and philosophy here. It makes you address your own mortality, it makes you confront your fears, it makes you think differently about how physics works and interacts. It makes you confront the weirdness of the universe in general. It does this all on the back of incredible environmental storytelling and writing. The narrative itself is sometimes whimsical, sometimes tragic, sometimes profound, sometimes philosophical, but always meaningful. And then to top it all off, it has a soundtrack that's absolutely gorgeous. I believe I've developed a slightly Pavlovian response. Whenever I hear like the main theme, I will start crying. That's how deep the emotions went in my personal experience with this game. And it sounds ridiculous. Oh, it's just a video game, Larry. What the hell are you talking about? No. You try it out for yourself. You're gonna see. Now, with all that said, and all this emotion and profound thinking about the existential stuff going on in this game, I always had this little nagging thing in the back of my mind as I was playing this. That was even more profound, if you can believe it. In these puzzles, you do deal with things like quantum rocks, for example, where they will disappear if you turn your back to them, or black holes and white holes, or gravity and space-time. And while these puzzles were fun to figure out and interact with, there was always this feeling that there was so much more to it. It was just a small taste, a small inkling of the full field of cosmology and astrophysics and quantum mechanics that this game was touching upon in a surface-level way. As Outer Wilds beautifully demonstrates, some of the best science fiction media takes the way that you interact with gravity and time and flips it on its head. Now, this is a book channel, so let's move on to books. For a lot of readers, the three-body problem was probably their version of The Outer Wilds. It was an experience that lent itself to thinking more deeply about quantum problems and the nature of reality and higher dimensions and all of these other big astrophysics questions. I do believe this book has received some rather recent uptick in interest ever since Netflix made a television show out of it, as is very helpfully pointed out on my cover. The three-body problem does something quite different than The Outer Wilds. The Outer Wilds, being more naturally a more interactive experience as a video game, needs to make sure that the science fiction elements of it still serve the underlying goal of satisfying gameplay. Whereas the three-body problem as a book doesn't have this requirement of needing to be interactive and having satisfying gameplay, so a lot of the science can be much more laid out. Thus, the three-body problem is a much more straightforward narrative experience. The characters that are trying to figure out the mystery of the three-body problem go through their journey in a much more straightforward way, but is much more grounded in real science. Now, at the end of the book, at the end climax, when the entire revelation of the answer of the three-body problem is presented to the reader, how do I explain this? The answer of what the reality of the three-body problem is seems like magic. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything for any of you, but for those of you who have read The Three-Body Problem, you probably know what I mean. It actually almost got to a point where I couldn't suspend my disbelief. It was that weird and wacky. But then the wildest thing happened after I finished the book and I was processing it and thinking about it. I was like, wait a minute, was the end of this book magic? Or is that just how weird quantum mechanics can be? And the reason I was able to ask this question was because I have had the privilege within the past year of reading two of the greatest science nonfiction books that I've ever read in my entire life. I think that they might have lowered my enjoyment of The Outer Wilds and The Three-Body Problem just because I know what the real thing is supposed to be, what real quantum mechanics are like. So these two books are What's Eating the Universe by Paul Davies and Black Holes by Brian Cox and Jeff Forshaw. And these two books are probably the greatest examples of science communication that I've ever seen in book form. I think I'm comfortable enough to say that, honestly. Because you see, in the modern era where no one cares about science unless they can profit from it, or they can deny it, also for profit. It's very important to have good science communicators so that, in general, society doesn't devolve back into the old ways, where humans didn't have curiosity enough to explore the natural world and understand phenomena. And most of those civilizations didn't work out too well, did they? Now, importantly, and something that I think these books do very well, is training you to understand that it's okay to not know something. Plus, the topics that these books deal with are astrophysics, but the big questions of astrophysics, the big questions of cosmology, of how did the universe start and what is quantum mechanics actually like, and these very deep, almost like philosophical questions about the universe. There are no, experimental solid answers, and so the answer, I don't know, just has to be something that's just normalized within the community. And I love that. I love the honesty, the pure, it's almost like a catharsis saying, oh yeah, we don't know. And that's exciting, and that's good, and that's cool. Because we live now in a society that seems to be like, oh no, I know it. All these influencers and politicians and people in social science, especially everyone on the internet who's like, oh yeah, I know the answer, and I'm gonna tell you the answer. Even though, by the way, a lot of them are wrong, or are just trying to sell something. It's very refreshing to engage in a field where a lot of the people involved are just like, oh yeah, we kind of don't really know much. I didn't realize how nice it is to not have the stress of being right, or being like, you have to be correct, or else you will be a pariah. I don't know. In general, society just needs to make more space for being unsure, being cautious. Enough of these confidence men. I need people who are confident that they don't know stuff, because that's more authentic and more useful to me than some moron spouting that I have the answer. No, you don't. And usually it's very provable that you do not have the answer. And that is another sort of interesting angle there. If we're not sure about the fundamental nature of the universe, how can we be sure of much of anything? Now, let me show you what I mean in this book. What's Eating the Universe by Paul Davies is by far the easier book to read of the two that I'm going to be discussing in this video. This book is broken down into very, very short chapters, and the entire book itself is only like 150 pages, which is insane to think. The big questions of the universe and cosmology are within this tiny, thing here. But the point of this book is to expose a non-astronomy, non-cosmology, familiar reader to the big ideas of cosmology. This will, to a certain degree, shatter your entire foundational thinking of what the universe is supposed to be like. And for some people, I know that foundation-shaking concept is kind of scary, but I will argue, and I will try and prove in this video, that that's actually really cool. It's exciting to be able to question fundamental stuff. So let me show you what I mean with just one of the concepts that's explored in this book. Okay, let's take the concept of space, right? Empty space, just space, right? All around you. It's empty. There's nothing there, right? I mean, you can feel air. Besides air, there's nothing there. Space is also quantifiable. A box has a set amount of space. Tupperware containers have a set amount of space. You can divide space inside of a box. All right, so that's the normal conceptualization of what empty space is like. Now, big shift here. Through the work of deep space satellites, we can see way, way, way out to the furthest reaches of the universe, and we can see other galaxies. And we have observed that every single galaxy in every direction in the entire universe is accelerating away from us. Now we know this because we can detect a redshift in the light that is hitting us from those galaxies. You yourself are familiar with redshifts as a concept. Even if you don't know the formal concept of the Doppler effect, you experience it every day. For example, when an ambulance or a police car with sirens on rushes past you and the sound of that siren sort of changes tone and shifts tone. That's because as the car is accelerating away from you, the frequency of the sound waves hitting your ear changes. And so the sound changes as the vehicle drives by you. Well, it's the same thing with light. In the electromagnetic spectrum, things moving away will create a longer wavelength, thus shifting the light spectrum to the red side. Red light is a longer wavelength than blue light, so redshift. Now, it's possibly some of you are thinking, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, right? It makes sense that everything's exploding outward because the universe started with the Big Bang, right? There was a big explosion and everything is moving out. Okay, but listen closely because that's not what's being stated. Every faraway galaxy is accelerating away from us in every single direction. That's a bit weird because if we were working with the Big Bang model where it was just a big explosion and everything is just scattered about, we would see different galaxies accelerating at very different paces. It's almost like, and I'll try and put a video example of it, a drop of water creating ripples, right? One side of that ripple is going to be accelerating from the other side obviously a lot faster than a point right next to it on the same wave. Once again, this is the explosion theory of the Big Bang, and that's not actually what the Big Bang was, which also means, yes, your teachers, your parents, your children's astronomy books were all sort of covering up the real truth of what the Big Bang actually was. It wasn't a bang, it wasn't an explosion. It was rather an expansion or an inflation. But what was inflating? Empty space. That's right, the conclusion that scientists have come up with is that empty space is expanding. Just emptiness is growing. Like, what the fuck? Just because I want to be very clear with this, we're going to look at page 25. Space really is growing bigger. Every day, 100 billion cubic light years of additional space appears within the observable universe. It takes a while to get used to the idea that empty space, a void, can stretch or swell, but it's true. Space is provably elastic. I wish I was a better cook than I am, or rather, I wish I had like a Jell-O mold kind of thing for Jell-O shots or whatever, because I would like to demonstrate this for you, although I'm not sure how I could physically do that with Jell-O. But imagine the universe in general is Jell-O, and the stars and galaxies are like a little like sparkle or sprinkle bits that you put inside of the Jell-O. The universe, or the Big Bang, was just you adding more Jell-O into that Jell-O mold, which would then mean the size of the universe, the size of the Jell-O expands, but the stars and galaxies themselves are not really actually moving. It's just the Jell-O that's expanding. That is how you should think of the Big Bang from now on, and that is what is happening currently now, as we speak, throughout the entire universe. Okay, this is insane. But this is it. This is exactly the kind of mind-bending stuff that this entire book specializes in, essentially. This is still a very weird concept to me. I mean, like, empty space is not empty? You kidding me? We can observe what's happening now. What's causing it to happen? What is making empty space expand? Well, we don't really know. And you have to, once again, you have to get used to that concept. We don't really know, but we've given it a name, and it's called dark energy. Why is it called dark energy? Well, for one, it's invisible. Two, we don't really know what it is, so we just call it dark. I guess it's a cool name to call something that you don't know. Ooh, dark energy. Now, in this book, Davies equates dark energy to anti-gravity, and he's going to explain what anti-gravity is in page 54 to 56. Anti-gravity is dubbed dark energy, partly because it is invisible, but also because its source is somewhat mysterious. In the 1930s, it dawned on physicists that there is no such thing as true emptiness. Even in a region of space devoid of all permanent residents, atoms, subatomic particles, photons, for example, there remains an irrepressible traffic of temporary residents, particles that flit in and out of existence for the briefest duration, bubbling up from the void into half-reality, only to dissolve away again almost immediately. And then he goes on to explain that these weird quantum particles that just appear and disappear act to repel not just themselves, but the Jell-O of the universe. Thus, space repels itself, thus space expands. So this breaks my brain. It's probably breaking your brain too. How can there be just these imaginary particles that just pop into existence and then make the universe expand? This is ridiculous. This is stupid. Like, what are we talking about here? And let me remind you, that's just one of the many concepts that are explored throughout the chapters in this book. Some of the observable phenomena that scientists see are so weird and nearly unexplainable that it's just like, what are we doing here? But literally, what are we doing here? How did we get here? How is any of this actually working? And you know what? Davies, several times within these chapters, just admits, we don't know. We genuinely don't know the answers to some of these things. But then that also, lends itself to, ooh, how can we figure it out? There we go. That's the exciting bit. And indeed, how can we figure that out? Because this book, while it introduced me to a lot of these concepts, it built this drive in me to actually find out the answers. Now, there has been one particular astronomical phenomenon that I've been obsessed with ever since I was a kid, and that is black holes. Black holes have been an obsession of mine ever since I was a little kid, and my mom would take me quite regularly to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And I had two favorite places inside that museum. One was the diorama of the giant squid attacking the sperm whale inside the blue whale room. The other one was inside the Hayden Planetarium, and there was a small little theater on the ground floor. This theater swaps between two films, and one of those films is called Black Holes: Gravity's Ultimate Triumph. Now, it's been there since the 90s, and I know this because I probably first viewed it in like 1999. Also, its production value definitely looks like something out of the 90s, I gotta admit. But you yourself can go watch the full 5-minute video here on YouTube. I'll put the link down below to Lisa Kuskuna's channel and the video. She was apparently the creator of that very video. Well, guess what, Lisa? That video was a fundamental, foundational part of my childhood. So congratulations, you've had an effect on me. And guess what? It's still there to this day in the American Museum of Natural History. I know this because back in 2023, I visited New York City with a friend, and I basically like pulled her with the force of a black hole towards that theater. And we sat down and watched it, and I was basically almost like vibrating with excitement as the film came on. It was this huge rush of nostalgia and like fun for me. I'm gonna put up this picture. I mean, look at it. Look how happy and excited I am. I made her take this picture. Now, Davy's book addresses black holes a little bit, but I wanted to know more about black holes. So I browsed a lot of different bookshelves in the science sections of a lot of different bookstores. And funnily enough, I came across a book about black holes, helpfully titled Black Holes. Now, there's a reason I said What's Eating the Universe was a much easier read than this book. That's because this book is not easy to read. I understand that's a bit of a tautology maybe, but this is basically a graduate level course in astrophysics and black holes condensed into a book. It is also meant to educate someone who is not an expert in astronomy or physics, and also not really math either. And that was kind of an important one for me because I'm not really that good at math, allegedly. So the challenge of this book was not memorizing math formulas and doing calculations. The challenge of this book was thinking about the very concepts of like space and time and physics in very different ways than we're used to thinking in an everyday scenario. And then the book trains you to do that to allow you to attempt to comprehend the absolute mindfuckery of what black holes are. Okay, let me put it this way. What's Eating the Universe breaks your brain in a fun and lighthearted way. It introduces you to a lot of different concepts in cosmology and astrophysics. It opens the door to interesting topics. And as the reader, you go, oh, that's cool, that's weird, that's interesting. Why is that like that? Black holes breaks your brain in a way that the United States Marine Corps does to recruits at boot camp. Like they destroy you as the individual so that they can build you back up into a Marine from the particles of the human that you used to be. This book does that somewhat similarly, except less traumatic. Let me give you an example. So one of the things that you're going to have to be able to do while reading this book is read Penrose diagrams. This book actually teaches you how to read Penrose diagrams. I'll try and give a sort of a closer look there, although I don't know if the camera's focusing or not. The book, of course, does teach you and instruct you on how to read Penrose diagrams, but they're not easy to learn about. There's a quote on page 59. Let me see if I can find it. It is worth checking that you understand the diagram well enough to see this concept before you read on. And my God, is that a quote that's relevant not just for Penrose diagrams, but for every single diagram in this book. I love astronomy, but historically I have been very bad at STEM classes beyond the high school level. Remind me to tell you guys about my college experience with calculus. Oof. But just because I didn't do well in STEM classes doesn't mean that I cannot learn STEM. Doesn't mean that I'm too stupid to learn STEM. Doesn't mean that learning STEM is a waste of time. And I want that to be something that you keep in the back of your mind, well, basically for the rest of your life, especially if you are also like me and you yourself have struggled with STEM topics in organized class structure before. Let me take you through the experience of learning Penrose diagrams in this book. So I figured like I'm pretty decent with 2D representations of 3D things, right? I read maps all the time. I actually do work with GIS quite a bit. I'm good at graphs, I'm good at charts, I'm good at data science-ish stuff. This should be a breeze for me, right? Wrong. Penrose is tough. And it's tough because it's not just a 2D representation of a 3D object, it's a 2D representation of infinite space and then infinite time. And then you also have to like understand light cones and things. It's basically taking the universe and putting it into a very straightforward, definable picture. And this requires a lot of shifting your perspective on how to look at this 2D image in order to actually understand it, because it's not really intuitive at all. And then over the course of the book, these Penrose diagrams get a lot more complicated because you add on more things onto the Penrose diagram as you explore more quantum physics and black holes. But with practice, I got it. And so can you. And let me tell you, it was rewarding as hell and fun as hell to be able to basically learn a new skill. Just over the course of a few chapters and a few pages, I learned a skill that actual astrophysicists they've used this stuff in their professional work. And I learned that in just a couple of chapters. That's incredible. The power of great science communicators to be able to make you learn these things in not that long of a time at all is spectacular. I love it. I love this ability. And now we can tack this on to Davy's work. Because while Davy's talked about black holes a little bit, let's go back to that whole space is expanding kind of thing with these like little particles. Black holes are pretty widely well known as these intense gravitational things that basically suck in everything in the universe. And they're so powerful that not even light can escape them. Well, weirdly enough, black holes do emit energy. They emit radiation. It's called Hawking radiation. It's named after Stephen Hawking. But how do they emit radiation? Shouldn't everything just be pulled into the black hole? Well, in the chapter called Hawking Radiation, page 194 to 195, there's a section on the quantum vacuum. One way to picture the quantum vacuum is to imagine particles constantly popping into it and disappearing again a fleeting instant later. These ghosts, the momentary flickers of particles, are known as vacuum fluctuations or virtual particles. Now, these particles appear in pairs, and the authors go on to explain that when this pair appears right at the event horizon, basically the border of the black hole, one of the pair can fall into the black hole, while the other is ejected into space as Hawking radiation. Now, this very thing presents a lot of problems for physicists because these two phantom particles are entangled. Now, what's quantum entanglement? It is the weirdest thing I've ever heard of. It was so weird that Albert Einstein called the effects that quantum entanglement has spooky action at a distance, which I love. I love that phrase. It is the perfect example of the concept of truth is stranger than fiction. So in my attempt to butcher this, entangled particles are basically two particles that are intrinsically linked. If you know the state of one, you automatically know the state of the other one, even though it's way, it could be on the other side of the universe for all we know. So they're intrinsically linked. When one of them falls into a black hole and supposedly gets annihilated, shouldn't the other one also be annihilated? But it's not. We see it. It has traveled the millions of light years to get to our instruments and our eyeballs. Now, this then touches upon another problem with black holes, in that do black holes actually destroy information in the universe? In a universe where we have laws that say you cannot destroy matter, you can just change it. And that goes into all sorts of funky things about quantum physics and thermodynamics of black holes that I barely just understood while I was still reading it. I'm not going to try and butcher that. You just got to read the book for yourself and figure it out on your own. Because I want to be clear here, I'm the book communicator, not the science communicator. They are the science communicators. I do very much appreciate the quote at the beginning of chapter 13. Nobody has the slightest idea what is going on. By Joseph Polchinski. That's a real quote there. And that's a quote related to the world as a hologram, which that's the thing that goes into, oh, is the universe a giant quantum computer? That's a whole thing. But the point is, these books are profoundly disturbing and fundamentally brain-breaking in the best way possible. Because I'm learning more about my observable and my unobservable universe. But you know what the best consequence was of reading these books? It wasn't learning the new skill of reading Penrose diagrams. It wasn't understanding Hawking radiation or quantum mechanics. It was the fact that I wanted to learn more. That these books pushed me to dive in to the world of quantum mechanics and particle physics and all this other weird physics stuff. This is a book called Something Deeply Hidden by Sean Carroll, and I'm about 1/4 of the way through it. It's pretty good so far. I'll report back if it also breaks my brain in a similar way. But that's the most valuable takeaway from this. If a book makes me fascinated enough in the topic or a related topic to then go explore that topic, that's one of the most valuable things I can take away from really any piece of art, but books in general. And if I didn't say it earlier in the video, these books reintroduced a love of science in me. This is a feeling I've not had since maybe early college. And now that I'm back in the world of science, I want to now start exploring all the unknown questions of other science fields. Not just in physics. One of the big questions that I've always been wondering about was, why does light behave as both a wave and a particle? And that's very much related to quantum physics, and I'm going to learn about that soon enough. Like other stuff, like, all right, what's in the giant ocean on Ganymede? Speaking of oceans, what's actually the makeup of the bottom of Earth's ocean? Because we actually have not mapped any significant chunk of the Earth's oceans. And for God's sake, what the hell is helium-3? I keep seeing this. Every single science fiction property I look at, it's helium-3. They're mining helium-3 in the moon and the asteroid belt, and they're going to war over helium-3. Is helium-3 a real thing? Is it actually useful for nuclear power? What is going on with this? Or was it just something that a sci-fi author saw one time and then the entire sci-fi community just decided to run with it? I think I need to learn more about chemistry and atomic physics there. And then more practically, what should I do about that asteroid that had a 3% chance of hitting the Earth in 2032? Oh, you didn't know about the asteroid that had a 3% chance of hitting the Earth in 2032? It's okay, it's down to less than 1% now. Well, it sounds like we should keep the space agencies funded in our governments, huh? And then let's fold this back into the possibilities of science fiction then. In the three-body problem, that end climax with the magic. Was that magic? Is that actually how things could work? It's spectacular that my answer is, I'm not entirely sure. Seriously, the conclusion of this book is ridiculous. It's as fantastical and magical as the protomolecule is in The Expanse or the Force in Star Wars. But is it possible? At this point, with the knowledge that I have now, I have to say, I don't know. And that's awesome. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Unless next time we both fall into a black hole, in which case I won't see you next time. because once you cross the event horizon of a black hole, time and space are sort of swapped in the math. And so what happens as you approach the singularity of a black hole, you approach a point where it is a particularly infinitely small point of time across an infinite space, and you just get annihilated across that infinite space. Oh, it's a little weird. Also, that's assuming that you haven't been spaghettified as you enter the event horizon. And also, that's if we're talking about a Schwarzschild black hole. If you're doing a Kerr black hole, there is a way, if you were also immune to spaghettification, you could go through a Kerr black hole into a different universe. Now, what that means is that